Hello? Fantastic. All right. Well, I mean, as has already been explained, time is of the essence. We've got to do this now. All right. So this is Advanced Custom Blocks. Today, I am focusing on a popular plugin called Advanced Custom Fields and how we can use it, and I guess some of the skills that a lot of us already have that we've got from developing themes, plugins, just WordPress websites in general, and how we can transfer those and create some crazy experiences in the block editor and all of that kind of stuff. Now it's the afternoon, we're all a little bit tired, so if you can please humor me, I need to get to know my audience a little bit. Can I ask everyone to please stand up out of their seats? Thank you. Okay, now I would like you to sit down if you have never heard of Advanced Custom Blocks before now. I mean, Advanced Custom Fields, sorry. Who's never heard of the plugin before now? Okay, cool. Who has never used it? Sit down if you have never used the plugin. All right, okay, cool. Sit down if you have never used the pro version of Advanced Custom Fields. All right, Elliot would be very disappointed in all of you sitting down. For those people that are left standing, I'm very curious to know, sit down if you have never used the flexible content field. A few, all right. Okay, so I'm going to be talking to about 10 people in the room, which is just amazing. But like we said, we're talking about now. And what is really so special about now? So you can all sit down, okay? And now, I guess, is really a big time of change for WordPress. And in order to talk about now, we might just need to quickly breeze through a little bit about before. Because I noticed at the start of today, when we were going around the room, there's a lot of new people here. They're new to WordCamps, they're new to WordPress, and maybe they just don't actually understand what the fuss is all about. But way back, we had this thing here. This is called the classic editor now, that lovely big white rectangle that you see up there where you could paint your masterpiece. All right, but pretty soon people realized that that wasn't enough to make the website of their dreams and people wanted to do more. And so they turned to this stuff called meta fields. But the built-in user interface for meta fields is, quite frankly, very poor. All right, don't tell the core devs that, but it's horrible. And so people realized this, they started making custom ones and doing all of that. And that's where we meet ACF, or Advanced Custom Fields. It is a plugin that takes that weird kind of like text key value store thing that we just saw before and turns it into these rich user interfaces that make putting in like customized content an absolute dream. So we have things there like you can see there's a color field, there's date pickers, there's even just plain stuff like text and paragraphs, and we can do things like require content to be set, or we can dynamically hide and show sections depending on values that people pick. And in general, it's just like a much better experience for this kind of custom stuff that we might want to do in the admin. So for me as a novice web developer, discovering ACF made me feel all of a sudden like a WordPress superhero. All right, all of a sudden, I went from kind of like fiddling around with things in the WYSIWYG to being able to design these really cool editing experiences in the admin using the GUI that ACF provides. And I managed to bumble my way through some templating code and all of that kind of stuff and get an output on the front end. And all of a sudden, it was just amazing. I could do whatever I wanted with WordPress. My clients loved it. I was having a good time. And in general, life was just pretty good, We got some new fields over time. I didn't really go back. I kept using ACF. However, when the flexible content field was released, that kind of really changed everything. So what this enabled you to do was to define these groups of fields called layouts. So it'd be a group of, you could place more fields into a layout, and then you put a collection of layouts together into this flexible content field, and when someone's authoring that content, they just come in and they go, oh, I would like to put some text in, and then they see the text fields, and I would like to put the call out in, and then they see the fields related to the call out. And you could just build up your page using these flex content fields. And pretty soon, myself and a lot of other people from what I can gather online realized all of the power that this presents, and they pretty much stopped using the regular WordPress content entirely. We just started hiding it or turning it off or whatever and doing everything in this flex content way. Because also, when it came to templating, it was so much easier, right? We could write this basically this one statement and almost have one template for the whole website. So what this does is it just finds what the layout name is called and it loads a template file called that layout name. And so all I need to do is basically just go through and make sure that the names match up. And all of a sudden now I can develop my websites in a totally different way. So rather than relying on fixed pages now, we started to build modular blocks. And also, all of a sudden, now clients can just come in and add more. It used to be, when I first started using custom fields, for example, you'd have to get the specifications of a website totally on point. Because if the client would come back and you'd be just about to launch the website and they go, oh yeah, we need another paragraph or an image right here. And you go, oh, okay. I'll go put in more fields. I'll go change the template code. But you can see here that you can just add new ones in. And that loop that I showed you before will just kind of take all of that into account. Also, and this was a huge thing at the time, vertical ordering of content stopped being a problem. When we were using fixed fields, we had to make sure that we got the order right, okay? So if we wanted the map, to be before the contact form, but after the paragraph or whatever, we had to make sure it was that way in the template. We had to make sure that hopefully the fields lined up in the admin too, or someone would get confused. This, now you can see, you can just drag and drop it around. And it was really, in my mind, kind of the precursor to the modern block editor that we have now. After discovering all of this, I have to say, life was pretty good. All of a sudden, we were developing, WordPress websites in this new way, and we were happy, we were productive, it's fantastic, and then, of course, it's, as always, time for change. Okay, Project Gutenberg was announced. You may hear me refer to Gutenberg or the block editor throughout this talk, and they are the same thing. I apologize if I use one or the other at certain times, but they're interchangeable. But the block editor was announced, and all the people like me who were absolutely crazy about advanced custom fields were very worried. Because I got to admit, I was not really a big fan of the classic editor, okay? I wasn't losing any sleep over losing that big rectangle. Apologies to the person from TinyMCE who's here. But what I missed is that I could change all of this. Right? Using the skills that I had PHP skills and I had, HTML skills, all that kind of, I could change all of this stuff. I knew the actions, I knew the hooks, and I could just turn it into a blank canvas where I could put whatever I wanted. And then it comes out that now all of a sudden I've got this, and I don't have everything up here. That's all the React application now. You can see that it expands a little bit, but it's still not really enough for a whole content authoring experience. And so, we were all just sitting there going what are we going to do? What's going to happen? And I think that, in general, we were just really worried about the change. Partially, I think, because we'd spent time building a system that worked for us, and we're always so protective of things that we have created ourselves. Right? Whenever something new comes along, we're always just at a rush to be nope, I've invested so much time into this that it can't possibly get replaced. There can't possibly be something better. But it sort of turns out that I got to have my cake and eat it too, and so did a lot of other people, because since ACF Pro version 5.8 or greater, we can now use the same field interface to create these custom blocks. And once again, life was good. So maybe you're just sitting here wondering, why don't we just make native blocks? We have already had some fantastic talks about that today. Why don't we just replace flex content with native blocks? Sometimes, honestly, you can. So I have made flexible content fields in the past before that just contain a simple sort of assortment of fields. So we put a heading block in there, we put a paragraph one in there and an image and a YouTube and all that kind of stuff. And we just find that clients would often be able to use that still easier than the classic editor. Something like that is the perfect example to just get straight up replaced by the block editor. However, for some of these other things where we've created these really custom experiences, we still want to customize the editor. So we're going to need some way to do that. One of the reasons why I really like using ACF blocks as opposed to native blocks is we get full control of the markup at render time. I'm not saying that isn't possible with native blocks, it's just a lot easier with ACF blocks. And I think really the big thing is why people don't want to sort of get into native block development is that they perceive it as being a steep learning curve. I must say though, it is getting better. We've seen some things like Rua's talk this morning I thought was very interesting, and he talked about the WP Scripts project, how that's making it easier for people to get into React development by removing the hassles of managing your build process and all that kind of stuff. But it's still, there's so much good stuff there, but it's still a big change. It's still a huge change, especially if you're not used to writing modern JavaScript, ES5 or ES Next. React is different, the paradigms of it all are different, there's a lot going on there, and most of us are busy, man. I work for an agency, we are pumping out the websites. Obviously, we take time to make sure it's done right, but they're flying out the door. And not everyone has that luxury of just being able to drop everything, learn new stuff, and then, pick up where they left off. We have so many legacy applications that we've got to maintain and have solutions for them. And so I guess we're looking at, all right, how can we progressively introduce this? Or how can we start getting some of the benefits of the block editor today without completely changing everything, all right? So hopefully now you're starting to come around. You might be going, well, if I'm going to use this ACF blocks thing, am I getting a watered down experience? Am I, is this block editor light or something like that because I'm using this? And for me, I really feel like the answer mostly is no. So native blocks can be static or dynamic, and I really like that ACF blocks are all dynamic. So a static block, when you save it, that block may define some additional HTML, something like that, and that gets saved into the content in the database. If you change that template, you need to update the post in order to change the markup. For me, that's a bit silly. It's why I use something like WordPress, is to have an abstraction over that. So I really want dynamic blocks where everything's rendered server-side, so that if the client needs this to change across the entire website right now, it can. For me, that's kind of like what I love about using a CMS in general. So the data is decoupled from the design, like I've been talking about, and I find for us that makes our development a lot faster. The portability or compatibility between, I guess, our old solution and the new one also makes our development a lot faster, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. As I mentioned, ACF blocks are registered using PHP, so you do this within a theme or a plugin, and you don't need to know any React or WP Blocks, JavaScript, API, any of that stuff. Great stuff to check out if you have the time, but you don't need to know any of it to use ACF blocks. And finally, I'm sure there would be some people who are familiar with ACF that are wondering how the data is saved. So it's not saved in post-meta like it used to be for things that are within ACF blocks. It's actually saved as a JSON literal object in a HTML comment, because I guess this is like the Gutenberg compatible way. But it is important to note that it's a really great replacement for, say, if you were using flex content or other fields to replace the content of your WordPress post. However, if you were using meta fields, I guess, as more what I would say is like actual meta, if it was more something that you would query by, as an example, or sort by, or like something like that, or is just like an additional piece of information that you want to be able to fetch out the database separately, then maybe it's still best suited like actually being a meta field and living in that drawer down the bottom. And in that case, probably weren't really considering like flex content or anything like that in the first place either. So it doesn't mean that post-meta or regular meta fields have completely gone away. Okay, so what's the learning curve like? How much time are we talking here? We're all busy people. If you already know about using flex content and have like built some templates for that or something like that, you only need to learn one new function. You should be able to basically walk out of this talk and just go do it, because it's that simple. If you've ever written a child theme, or plugin, then it will be really easy for you to pick up, because you have some knowledge of, I guess, what it means to edit PHP within WordPress, maybe where some of the files live and things like that. If you've never done any of that before, if you've never used advanced custom fields, or have never edited the PHP of your WordPress website, then it may be a little bit harder. But all of that difficulty is going to come from the more general concepts surrounding those things and not ACF blocks in and of itself. It's just that I guess you have probably a little bit further to get up the ladder before you can use it with the same fluency as people that are used to doing that kind of stuff. All right. So we on board? Should we get into it? I will not be sacrificing to the live coding gods today, so I apologize. So we're just going to have a lot of code on screen and that kind of stuff. But here's where we really, I guess, start getting into it. So the usual disclaimers: if you're making edits, use a child theme, edit and test locally. Do not test or make changes in production until you're sure. Better yet, have a testing and deployment process. If you want to know more about that, wait till I've had a couple beers. I'll be yelling it at you later tonight. Okay, so it all comes down to this one function. It was introduced in ACF 5.8. It's called ACF register block type. Args is variable there. It takes an associative array of arguments, and they define, I guess, how our block behaves and what we need to do to get it all up and running. So let's check it out. On the left here, we're going to have the arguments, and then on the right, this is the block selector in the block editor. Okay, so this is like a piece of the block editor where you go and you click on the plus and it's like new block. And I'm just going to use that to maybe highlight how some of the choices that we make here affect what we see. Now I've just realized there's actually a slide missing from this, but I'm using a fictional example, as we all need to do for demos. My fictional example was a website about dogs called Good Boys. Hope you all enjoy it, and so we're building a featured doggo block. All right, let's get around it. So the name is the unique name for this particular block. So this is like an ID for your block. It should be globally unique. You cannot have two blocks that exist with the same name. So you may want to prefix it with like a namespace. You could do like my theme / whatever, but in general, it's like, think of it as like a slug or an ID, avoid spaces. I wouldn't capitalize, that kind of stuff. It's just going to get messy. All right, the title. So the title is what's displayed up here. It's like the human readable, nice name of the block, and you can see it highlighted over there in the block selector. Make it translatable. That's what those sort of wrapper tags there are. And then we also have the description, which is not shown on this particular part of the editor. It's in the top right when you're actually editing the block itself. We have the category. Blocks belong in different categories, and as you go through the block selector, they're all separated out into the categories. So I put this one in embeds. You get to define an icon for your block, and it will take like the name of a dash icon. You can also pass it an array if you want to specify a foreground and background color for that icon, if you want it to look a bit snazzy. Or if you really want to get fancy, you can also pass it a string that is an SVG. So you can just pass an SVG straight in there for a custom icon. And finally, we have some keywords which help when we're searching. So now with the block editor and people adding additional plugins and us making custom blocks, we could end up with so many blocks that it's really hard for the client to find the one that they're looking for. So then being able to find it through search is actually an important thing. So we can define synonyms here, which may not be the actual thing in our name, but what they can find it by. So this kind of stuff is really all like meta about the block. It defines like what it's called and what the title is, what category it's in, all of that kind of stuff. The next few things are, I guess, like the real meat of it all. So the first thing is render template. All right, so we pass this in. If you want to use render template, you pass it in the full path to a PHP file, and this is where your markup and everything will live. This is where you'll make your, the field calls and all of that kind of stuff and do your regular ACF thing. And so you just pass it in a string that goes there. You also, or not also, you have the option of instead providing a callback. So you can provide a function name as a string. You can provide a class method if that's what you want, or you could provide just like an anonymous function. I think even like an invocable object. I'm pretty sure anything that satisfies like PHP's callable type will work. And so, that way, if you maybe have some conditional logic you want to run before you select the template or something like that, it can happen. If you define both for some reason, you just want to overachieve, render callback will actually take precedence. So that one will get run and your template won't be loaded. Styles and scripts are very similar. So we can just pass it in like, something, just a style sheet or a JavaScript, a JavaScript file. And they're both optional. You don't need to load additional styles for your block, but if you do, they'll get loaded in both the admin and on the front end, and they will do so on an as-needed basis. So if the block isn't on the page, that style sheet doesn't get loaded. JavaScript and CSS is a bit more complicated these days. And so sometimes we might end up in situations where our style sheet or our JavaScript or something like that has dependencies. And WordPress has a great system for handling this already. However, this kind of like simple, quick interface that we've seen above is just meant for getting up and running really quick or really simple scenarios. If you need to also like make sure that your assets dependencies get loaded, call the regular sort of like WordPress WP enqueue script or whatever functions, then you can do so within one of these. Oh, sorry, I've got to go through all over again. That's just not going to work. Through one of like the callbacks. So again, you pass in any of the callback types, and then from there you can call the regular WordPress script and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how I can't just skip past this, but hopefully now you'll really remember it. Okay, cool. So like I was saying, it's very similar to render callback, takes any callable type. Let's actually look at some code for making a block now. So as I mentioned, good boys. Our example is dogs, because what's more wholesome? This is minimum viable block registration, basically, that we're doing here. Firstly, we're going to check if the function that we want exists. So this lets us know if we're using a version of advanced custom fields greater than 5.8. Also notice that where we're doing our add action call to like hook in a registration function, we're putting that on ACF init. So this is kind of nice because it means that it won't run unless advanced custom fields is also active and like running. So rather than putting it on like WordPress init or something like that. This is our register block type call. It's basically the same things that I've been showing you on the screen there. And this is our minimum viable template. Technically, you don't need this stuff, but it's a good idea to just pop that in there. This deals with some common Gutenberg kind of class names and attributes that the editor passes through to you to deal with things like layouts and alignments. So you don't need that, but it's a good idea to have that for all the blocks. And as far as the actual block goes, if I can, there we are, you can see down the bottom, it's just a very static thing at the moment. I've just written hello world there. I'm not calling any of my dynamic data. It's just hello world, like we just want to get something showing in the admin. So as a final step, we just need to attach a field group to it. Now when we go to the field group dropdown, we have block as a location option, and we can set that. And from there, we should be good. So found it, and now you can see like the hello world just output because we're not using the data, and I've set one custom field on this block over on the side, and it just lets me pick like a custom post. All right, so again, we're just trying to get up and running, but you can see the field over here and the output up there. So let's just skip forward a little bit past the kind of hello world thing and get to the point where I've actually defined some markup and some styles for that block. So that's just, you do that like you would regular HTML and CSS. And so now I guess this is more of like the finished block. So you can come in here and pop it in, come over here and select a dog. And then I go fetch that post and use that post to then dynamically populate the data of that block. And you can see that as we update and pick a new dog, the content changes. So this is like a live sort of like preview in the admin, which is definitely something that we weren't really able to do with flexible content. So, and once more, life is good, right? We're kind of back to where we were before, and now we have this almost like supercharged flexible content block in the block editor. So it's like, we've got our old kind of like customized interfaces back, and we've got some cool new tricks like I showed you there with preview mode. So you can also flick over to edit mode, which just renders out the regular ACF fields in the editor there. This can be really good if you have lots of fields, or you have like old field groups that have multiple columns of fields in them, and like complex things like that. Having them over in the sidebar over here might not work for you, so you can just use the edit mode there. Just really quickly, if you are someone that has a lot of flex content, I I don't think we're going to run through this just for time reasons, but go check out the slides when they're posted online. This is like a 3-minute speed run of me converting a flex content block into an ACF block. Takes that long. So go check that out. We'll skip past that. Tips for breaking up flexible content as well. This might be better off if you come and revisit this at another time, but effectively there are lots of ways that you can get your field definitions out of advanced custom fields. You can use their local JSON feature to like save them as JSON files, or you can use the PHP export, and you could quite easily, using a text editor, cut up those files to then like take out the sub-field groups and define them as their own top-level field groups. We've done that in extreme cases. Worst case, remake the fields. It will probably take you like 10, 15 minutes. Okay, so just going a little bit deeper, here's some lesser used arguments of register block type. And it can do some cool stuff. So post types, we pass that an array of post types that we want this block to support, and it will be hidden on all other post types. Alignment, we can set the default alignment when it first gets loaded into the editor. And same with mode. We can choose if we want it to come into preview mode or if we want it to come into edit mode. And then finally, with the supports array, we can also turn some of these things on or off, or like limit the options of them a little bit. So down here in align, I've chosen that I want to support the full and wide alignments. I could also pass back false and turn off alignments altogether, and that little toolbar would then disappear from the Gutenberg block. Same with mode. You can disable preview mode if you don't think it's really going to work for your field group, or maybe the kind of like thing that you're outputting on the front end is way too hectic to have in the admin, so you just want to turn it off and just only see the fields. Multiple is a cool one. You can set it to false, and then they can only put one of those blocks into the content, which I think is like really neat. Okay, so now you've kind of seen what it takes to get a block up and running. And there might be some developers in the audience that are considering taking that step. For those people that haven't really worked with the block editor before, and particularly those that are coming from a PHP background, I guess here's some bonus tips for just dipping your toes in the water a little bit. This is a really cool blog post on synchronizing color palettes between the Gutenberg color picker and ACFs. Again, there's a link in here, so when the slides get posted online, come and check it out. It's pretty easy to disable custom colors and font sizes in Gutenberg, and if you're building websites for clients, I'd almost highly recommend that you do. So it's just a couple of add theme support calls. You can get rid of them. And you can also, using a couple of other filters, you can define your custom color palette, and you can define your custom text sizes and all of that kind of stuff. Have some really nice consistency throughout. You can filter the available blocks. Again, it's just another filter. You can do things in there like test what the current post type is, all of that kind of stuff. Make sure you don't filter out your own custom blocks that you've just spent all this time setting up. And you can also add your own custom block categories using PHP if that's something that you want to do. So again, another filter, and the documentation for this is on the kind of developer docs and everything. Finally, if you're a big Flex content user, you may have discovered a project called Timber. Does anyone here use Timber? Can I get like any hands in the air? Yeah, there's dozens of us. It's like anyway, I love Timber. Like I really love building WordPress websites using this framework called Timber. And it gives you an object-oriented interface into WordPress, introduces some kind of polymorphism to your templates and WordPress objects. And it lets you use a templating language called Twig, which I'm a huge fan of. But if you want to render your blocks using Timber and Twig, here's pretty much how you get it done. This is your render callback. That will handle you for any block as long as a file of the same name exists within views/blocks. And yeah, that'll just kind of like pass in context and any args applied to it. And this is just the same sort of template that has been edited to now kind of contain Twig tags and all that kind of stuff. This is just to show the difference to the one before, but in reality, you would probably actually break it up into subcomponents because that's kind of the whole idea of using something like Twig. So this is a little bit more complex, might look a little bit more foreign, but in the time that we've created this one block, we've also created 3 reusable components that we can then, I guess, combine in other blocks. So we've been talking a little bit about components on the front end and how it's great to have these discrete things that are reusable and kind of have like an API in terms of, okay, we pass this in and we get this out. You can use like templating languages like Twig. You can even make the same thing in PHP if you really want. And that whole concept, I think, still has a lot of value on the server side as well, not just the front end. It's great to have these little template parts that have a known API, and so you can do things like adapt them. You can make it so that you can just pass in a post, or you can pass in custom params and kind of get the same result anyway. Finally, if you're really nuts, and I'm coming up to the edge of my time sort of here, you can look at defining your blocks and your register block calls as class instances. I'm not going to go too deep into this because I feel like if you're doing this, you're probably nuts and you have a very opinionated way about how you would do it, and you're going to disagree with my way. Okay? But you can do things like extend a base class that handles all the registration for you, or you could use like a service class or like manager class to sort of register them. You can do nice things when you're sort of within the PHP environment, like dynamically detect if the template files or scripts exist and enqueue them. And if you're doing that kind of stuff, I highly recommend that you use an autoloader because it makes the entire process so much more fun. All right, so just breezing through all of that really heavy stuff there, but I just want to say, like, it's definitely a new time for WordPress. It's a big time of change, and change can often be uncomfortable. It's always hard, and it always, I guess, is one of those things where we struggle to feel like maybe these skills that we've invested all this time into aren't worth anything anymore. And I guess today I really just wanted to present some things to you and show you that we can still do some like really amazing things just using, I guess, the WordPress skills that we already have. We can embrace the block editor without retooling and retraining using ACF Blocks. And I mean, yeah, I'd just like to say that really, like, you shouldn't let the technology kind of hold you back. If you want to learn React, learn React. If you already know PHP and you're comfortable there, you can do some incredible stuff. I just encourage you to get out there and build and experiment and try it all out. So, special thanks to our organising team and our sponsors. Without them, I wouldn't be able to stand here and talk to you all this afternoon. I'd also like to thank Elliot from Advanced Custom Fields for graciously giving me some of his time on the lead up to this talk to help me prepare. I would like to thank Frame Creative, the people that I work for flying me out here to speak to you all today. We're a branding and digital agency based in Adelaide, South Australia. I am Alex James Bishop. You can find me on Twitter there. I kind of just post programming memes and that's about it. And remember, life is good. It is the best time now to be a web developer that there ever has been. There's so much stuff out there, and the level of choice that we have can feel a bit crushing or overwhelming at times, but honestly, it's all just great stuff. You can take it or leave it, and it's up to us, I guess, to decide where we go from here. So thank you very much for having me today. Do we have time for any questions? 5 minutes. All right, hit me. We've got one up there. Apologies in advance if the answer is, I don't know.
Have you ever tried to write a script that will convert your flexible content builder into the new blocks that you create? Like, is there you've taken a website, you've created exactly the same blocks, and you've converted it? No. To be honest, that's really something that would have absolutely been my jam about 6 months ago. I've kind of turned over a new leaf recently of not spending 20 hours automating a task that takes 30 minutes. So I've sort of been actively trying to stop myself from doing that kind of stuff because I used to over-optimize on the automation front. I think that it definitely would be possible. You just need to decide what format you want to work with them in, and my recommendation for that would probably be the JSON format. So have your theme, do you know about the JSON format for it? Yep. So I would just work with them because you can just really easy pass them into an associative array, and I think that it would be very easy then to split out each of those layouts just off into its own group then, and you just need to work out a way of coming up with, I guess, unique group names and stuff like that, because they need to be globally unique. You could literally just generate them on a timestamp or something like that. So yeah, would be
definitely something you could do if you wanted to do that. It would be a great WP CLI kind of like thing, I think. That would be like the ideal kind of framework within which you'd build something like that. But I haven't personally done it. Sinking a beer at the after party? Can
I ask one more question?
Yeah, sure.
So it's not too wrong to believe you would turn off everything in Gutenberg and just build your own blocks?
You can, but that was my initial reaction. I think that some of the things that you get in Gutenberg just out the box are almost like kind of better, like particularly when it comes to text content. So I actually really like having individual list and paragraph and all of those kind of like blocks, even like some of the stuff like button and heading, I leave all of those on. And I try not to make ACF blocks anymore that use the ACF WYSIWYG field, because like we're instantiating like tiny MCE within this whole like block editor, and it just gets really JavaScript heavy. So you could do that, particularly if you're building from scratch, but I really do enjoy the text editing experience of a lot of the Gutenberg stuff. I just build blocks for custom things.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. Yep.
So maybe this was implied before, but when you were talking about, hey, there's this one function you need to learn to register an ACF block.
Yep.
And there's certain arguments you pass to that. Those arguments looked very familiar. Are they identical to registering a regular block? Because it looked a lot like the same ones.
I believe it's very similar, but no, it's not actually quite the same.
Okay.
That is... Elliot? Yeah, are they the same? But yeah, my understanding is like some of the supports and stuff is a direct correlation. Supports, I think, definitely lines up with support, but yeah.
Yeah, so the arguments that you can pass into the PHP function are exactly the same as the native JavaScript props, but with a little bit of sugar sprinkled on top. So you get some extra stuff in there like the callback and the assets, JavaScript and CSS type stuff.
I thought it looked familiar. So
Yeah.
Yeah, which is cool. So it means that any time that the Gutenberg developers add new properties to the JavaScript API, the PHP ACF equivalent will just inherit that as well. Yeah.
Neat. All right, awesome. Any other questions?
Howdy. What are some examples of like custom blocks that you've built for people?
Okay. Well, I'm not on really like my computer or anything, so I can't sort of like show you. But what we typically really try and do is similar to what you saw with the featured dog block, is we try and make really simple interfaces that generally do like pretty complex things under the hood. So that way the client can grok them really easily. We have a stock set that we pretty much install on like any kind of website. Some of them aren't needed anymore now that the plugins and stuff have caught up. So we used to have like a Gravity Forms one and all of that kind of stuff because we just needed it, but now they've got their own. However, like, yeah, a lot of the time we find ourselves again and again and again, like just having this thing called a combo block or a feature block or whatever. I'm pretty sure everyone would have seen something like what I'm talking about. There's an image, there's a title, there's some text, and there's one or more buttons. And it's laid out in a number of different ways, but those items are like always there. We pretty much put one of those on every website because like everyone wants one. And then a lot of the time after that, we're looking at things like post grids and related objects and stuff. So they might just pick a category and we'll automatically pull in like, 9 posts from that. Beyond that, like getting into more complex things, I've built graphs. So using like a JavaScript front-end like graphing library and just people supplying some like numbers and parameters in ACF, and then we pass that into like, I was using like Apex charts, I think, with Vue, and outputting like a dynamic animated graph on the front end. Even like we are starting to build things more with the kind of Vue frameworks, like Vue, React and Svelte. And so a lot of the time, yeah, we'll just like create a block that defines any of the component like props or params and then just passes them straight through into it as a JSON object. So yeah, so you can do pretty much anything, but we find a lot of the time our clients have pretty similar needs for content, and then we just build blocks where where they have unique needs. So. Cool. Are we done time-wise?
We're done, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me today, guys.
Thanks, Alex.